Good afternoon and welcome all. I'm very excited for today's conversation with the Council on Criminal Justice AI Task Force, John Jay College Future of Public Safety Initiative, and the AI and Justice Consortium, deciding on AI procurement, deployment, and accountability in criminal justice. My name is Chris Edley III. I'm the Executive Director of the AI and Justice Consortium. The consortium works to organize leaders across expertise and perspective to mitigate the harms and seize the opportunities of AI in criminal justice. This panel represents just that type of work. To my knowledge, this is the first of its kind publication that they've just released, a real tool, a guide to procurement and implementation of AI tools in the criminal justice system. It goes beyond simple ideas about how, why, when, and where tools should be used and gives real practical information to agencies, nonprofits, and other stakeholders regarding how they can safely, responsibly, effectively use AI in the criminal justice system. I'd like to introduce and welcome uh, the moderator for today, welcoming her in her own house, really, Erica Bond of John Jay. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you, Erica. Take it away.
Great. Thank you, Christopher. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm Erica Bond. I'm the Vice President of Justice Initiatives at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. It's really my pleasure to be here with all of our panelists and our audience and to welcome you. So before we begin, I just need to share a quick message about programs at John Jay. John Jay College educates fierce advocates for justice, a calling that demands robust debate, rigorous inquiry, and respectful dissent. And consistent with this commitment, we support academic freedom and convene conversations reflecting multiple perspectives. So that means that the views expressed during this conversation belong to the speakers and do not represent the opinions of John Jay College. So with that, I do want to thank our partners at the AI and Justice Consortium and the Council on Criminal Justice for making this program possible. Their commitment to rigorous and practical guidance on one of the most consequential issues facing the criminal justice field today is exactly the kind of collaboration that John Jay is very proud to support. I'd like to give a special thanks to Christopher Edley III, the consortium's executive director, for his welcome remarks and his ongoing partnership. A special thank you also to my colleague, Rebecca Atkinson, who directs partnerships and programs for our Future Public Safety Initiative, for all of her hard work in organizing this panel. So today's webinar is actually a follow-on to a series that we did called Demystifying AI in Criminal Justice. And that was hosted by our Future Public Safety Initiative, along with the AI and Justice Consortium. All of those panels, which covered policing, corrections in the courts, and actually Director Derek was a part of that series. Those are all available online, and I really would encourage folks who are interested in those kind of specific verticals to check those out. I think we can probably even pop them into the chat at some point. But I want to tell you a little bit about how this fits with our future of public safety work. So we have this initiative here, which is really built on the conviction that the future of public safety must be grounded in evidence, in equity, and accountability. And there's perhaps no area where that conviction is more urgently needed right now than artificial intelligence. AI tools are already being used across law enforcement, courts, and corrections, often faster than the governance frameworks that are needed to oversee them. And so this series really attempts to close that gap, to really give practitioners and policymakers, advocates, and communities the knowledge and the tools that they need to engage with AI critically and responsibly. So today's program fits squarely in that mission. We'll be discussing an important new resource from the Council on Criminal Justice, Assessing AI for Criminal Justice, a User Decision Framework. This is, as Chris said, a very detailed and practical guide that's designed to help agencies evaluate, procure, implement, and oversee AI tools at every stage of the process. So here is how the next hour or so is going to work. We are going to begin with a brief presentation from Jesse Rothman, who is the director of the Task Force on Artificial Intelligence for the Council on Criminal Justice. He'll tell us a little bit about the task force. He will walk us through the framework and its key components. And then we'll move on to a moderated discussion with Jesse and three excellent members of CCJ's task force. And they will share their perspectives on the framework and what it means for our systems of safety and justice across the country. We will then close with audience Q&A, and I'll say more about that in just a moment. But first, let me please introduce our panelists. We are delighted to welcome first Melissa Nelson. She is the state attorney for Florida's 4th Judicial Circuit, a role she's held since January 2017. She's been reelected twice, most recently in 2025. And she leads an office of more than 300 attorneys, staff, and investigators. And she's pursued both public safety and smart justice reforms simultaneously. She serves on several local and national boards, including ATF's National Crime Gun Intelligence Governing Board and Florida's Cold Case Advisory Commission, and she is also a fellow of the American College of Trial Lawyers. Next, we have Chirag Bains. He's a senior fellow at Democracy Fund and a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. He served as Deputy Assistant to the President and Deputy Director of the White House Domestic Policy Council under President Biden, where he led the development of the Executive Order on Police Reform, comprehensive gun violence reduction strategy, and new programs to support community violence intervention. And most critically for today's conversation, he also co-led an interagency strategy on artificial intelligence and equity, and he helped to develop the blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights. Earlier in his career, he was senior counsel at the Department of Justice, and he also earned the Attorney General's Award for Exceptional Service for his work on unconstitutional policing in Ferguson, Missouri. Next, we've got Bree Derrick. She is the director of the Idaho Department of Correction, where she's led the agency's rise to national recognition as a model for evidence-based correctional practice. She has overseen the division of prisons, probation and parole, and management services, and she has more than 20 years of experience in corrections and behavioral health systems. Before joining the department, she worked at the Justice Center, which helped more than a dozen state correctional agencies implement large-scale reforms. So thank you for joining us today, Director Derrick. And last but not least, we have Jesse Rothman here with us. He leads the Council on Criminal Justice's national initiative to develop best practices for the integration and oversight of artificial intelligence across the criminal justice system. So a very small charge that Jesse has here. As the director of a 15-member task force on AI, he coordinates efforts to establish consensus, governance principles, and operational standards for AI applications across the criminal system and community organizations. He previously worked in criminal justice policy and research across multiple organizations. So we are very grateful to have this fabulous panel with deep expertise across the system. We really appreciate you taking the time today and for your service really to the task force. So one last thing before I hand it over to Jesse, and this is for our audience, we want to hear from you. So please use the Q&A feature, not the chat, to submit questions throughout the program. We will do our best at the end. We will reserve time to get to as many questions as possible. You don't have to wait until the end. You can post questions throughout, and we will keep track of them. And like I said, we'll try to get to as many as we can. All right, so with that, I am delighted to turn things over to Jesse Rothman of the Council on Criminal Justice. Jesse, the floor is all yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Erica, and thanks, Chris. I'm going to share my screen so we can get into the details a little bit. I think that's working now. Yeah, so I want to sort of get into the details of what this framework is, because I think in a lot of ways that's kind of the particular value add that this framework is like, in AI, it's so hard to get really concrete about what's happening because the field is moving so fast. It's a term and it's a field that sort of spans such a broad thing. And what we really tried to do here was get it specific of like, what should we actually do? What can we do to help practitioners, help policymakers, help observers and advocates think really in the weeds here. So for those who don't know, let's introduce the Council on Criminal Justice for a second. We are a nonpartisan think tank and an invitational membership organization dedicated to advancing safety and justice. And we bring together experts and leaders from diverse backgrounds, positions, ideologies, and experiences to come together to develop solutions, recommendations, and ideas facing the criminal justice system. And unsurprisingly, I think that's a great tagline for a group that should be thinking about AI right now. We're in a phase in this moment in the world and this technological development that we need everybody to be thinking together in a really serious and considered way. And I'm excited to be that means that we're doing that here at the task force at CCJ. And we're kind of in the middle of our work. You'll see sort of we're imagining that we have 3 primary work products. In the fall, we released a set of principles to guide the kind of normative position of how AI should play a role in the system, in the criminal justice system. And now we're in the middle, but this is user decision-based framework, which is thinking, okay, so we agreed that this is the why, then how, and then we'll leap to there into the what, and hope that this can be a foundation for a lot of future work. And the reason why we decided to do a decision framework is really this kind of thing that I was framing is we really need to think about what actually are we trying to do here. It's so much of the conversation about AI gets, I think, stuck in this kind of binary of sort of this frame of is it good or is it bad, and sort of however you answer that question, you're still left with the fact of then what, and I think that's really missing and really crucial, as Erica said, and I think is just indisputably true. The sort of development of the field and the development of the marketing of the tools is just outpacing the governance infrastructure and mechanisms. And so there's an urgent need to think, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it in a way that can lead to sort of iterative improvements, because things are really moving so fast. And AI has showed up in everybody's life, I'm quite sure, on this Zoom and in their work, whether you work in the criminal justice system or around it. And there's something very special about criminal justice. The stakes are so high in the work that we do that we have a special duty to be really thoughtful and serious, and we can't sort of just the kind of the move fast and break things mantra is not a sort of best practices recommendation for us. I think that we all agree on that. So the framework is laid out through 5 phases, and sort of the first 2 is thinking about kind of the preparatory work of how do you make sure that your organization, the agency that you work with or for, is ready to think about these issues. So we have checklists and tools to think through those questions, and then some aids to think through what actually are we talking about? What is the tool that we're thinking about using? How does it work? Do we know that it works? How risky is it? How promising is it? And then it flips. And then after the second one, we sort of go into the third 3, which is the title for the kind of the frame for today. So these are the third 3 are about procurement, deployment, and accountability. How do we sort of ensure that this moment of high leverage where you're deciding what to buy and how the contract should be arranged is used to ensure that safety and justice are advanced as much as possible, that you implement it and you deploy the tools thoughtfully and carefully, and that you have an ongoing way of thinking about it, that deployment doesn't just happen once and you fall away. So that's the core piece of the framework itself. And again, I'll emphasize, I put a QR code with the full document. It's a lengthy document, and we're proud of the details. I think we'll get into it over the course of this hour, that the details really are important. And in addition to the core pieces, we have these 10 appendices that are tools for really thinking through these questions. That one of the challenges in developing this work was, how do we do something that's both specific enough to be real and conscious of the fact that we're not in anything resembling a stable equilibrium with AI tools and something. So it's not just check the box and never think about it again. It's sort of use these checkbox as a method for getting you into this way of thinking and the sort of making sure you're asking the right questions. And so again, I think I'll just end with this framing that AI is just like incredibly interesting to me, and I imagine to many people that it combines everything that is happening. It's like it's about this grand sort of process of trillions of data points being collated simultaneously, about like many trillions of dollars being invested in this all of these decisions being made so quickly. And at the same time, the devil's in the details, that we have to be able to find ways to be in both spaces of the grand and the micro. And that's sort of what this framework is attempting to make possible for practitioners. I'll stop there and hand it back to Erica.
Great. Thank you, Jesse, for that overview. I really do think this is a very helpful tool and encourage everyone to download it. It goes, I think, a long way to helping agencies and the communities they serve move beyond some of the hype of AI and really systematically assess whether and how to use AI to address problems large and small within the justice system. So I think we'll have more of an opportunity to get into some of those details with our panelists about the specifics of the framework. But before we do that, I really would like to open it up to each of our panelists to weigh in with some kind of broader reflections about how AI is shaping justice work across the country. We know it's already reshaping how criminal justice agencies operate, sometimes very visibly, sometimes much more quietly. And the stakes, Jesse, as you noted, are very high. People's liberty, their safety, their rights are on the line. And I think the framework takes a lot of that into account in ways that we'll get into. And each of our panelists has a really unique perspective on how this is playing out. So what I'd like to ask to start is, what are the impacts that you believe that AI can have on safety and justice across the country, good and bad? And how do you see the CCJ framework really responding to and addressing those impacts? So I will start with Chirag because I see him nodding and I know he's got thoughts to share with us. Chirag, kick us off, please.
Thanks, Erica. It's great to be with you, everyone. I started my career as a prosecutor. I was a federal prosecutor of civil rights crimes. I've also investigated police misconduct and abusive jail conditions. I've seen the criminal justice system from multiple sides. And so that's sort of informing my views here. I'll say it feels like every conversation in life now has to involve AI in some way. Whatever you're doing, we have to talk about the AI aspects of it. And sometimes it feels like a stretch. It's not a stretch in this case. The market is flooded with AI vendors making claims about what their technology can do and pitching technology at all kinds of system actors, from police to probation to corrections and more. And in some cases, AI tools, I can see the clear benefit to the justice system, assuming they're reliable and you can test them and validate them, as we'll discuss, I think, further in this call. But there are examples out there, AI helping public defenders and prosecutors manage evidence, 911 call takers using AI to improve emergency response, new approaches to DNA analysis that could help us solve cold cases. These are beneficial uses of AI, and they could really improve outcomes in the justice system in terms of safety and fairness. It's also true that unchecked use of AI can pose serious risks to our civil rights and our civil liberties. I mean, folks may have seen some of these examples, but I want to just call out a few because I think they're quite vivid and they show what's at stake. One example in Colorado, a woman and her 4 children were held by police, including her 6-year-old child, at gunpoint because an automated license plate reader falsely matched her car to one that was reported stolen. In Georgia, because of an erroneous facial recognition ID, a Black man was arrested and spent nearly a week in jail for a retail theft that occurred in Louisiana, and he had never been to that state before. And then you're seeing increased use of AI tools for surveillance, particularly facial recognition, by law enforcement in ways that raise serious privacy and First Amendment concerns. We've seen live tracking in Louisiana and the surveillance of peaceful protesters in Florida. and also the surveillance of protesters by ICE in Minnesota. So these are all areas that raise serious concerns. And the framework that CCJ put out, that we put out through the task force, I think is helpful for beginning to tackle these questions in a granular way for agencies that are considering procuring and deploying AI tools, for communities that should have a strong say in that, and of course will be subject to those tools in many cases. And I think it's useful for breaking down the process. Do we understand the tools? Are they validated? What kind of error rates are there? Is there bias that can be addressed or not? The framework helps you to understand that. A second area that I think is really important is legal concerns, due process concerns. I mentioned First Amendment concerns. These technologies, many applications of them at any rate, are safety and rights impacting, meaning they implicate constitutional rights and statutory rights. And so the framework also includes attention to those concerns. And then the last piece that's on my mind these days, and I think it may be the most significant one, is the framework also tries to ensure that there's some democratic accountability to the community in procurement decisions. We don't sort of willy-nilly adopt these tools, purchase them, and deploy them, that you should go to the public first and understand, do people want this tool? Is it helpful? And are people getting the information they need to assess whether the tool is actually improving safety and justice in their communities? Those are a few of the things I think the framework helps with, and I'm excited to discuss over the rest of the call.
Great. Thank you, Trog. I think that sets us up very nicely to kind of think about broadly what we're trying to solve for here with the framework. State Attorney Nelson, please jump in. Would love to hear your thoughts about how you think AI is impacting safety and justice, and particularly your work as a prosecutor, and also sort of how you see it solving for some of the problems that we face with the justice system.
So I got involved in this work with CCJ, particularly because of the way we are seeing AI in all different levels in the criminal justice system. We're grappling with generative AI being used in criminal conduct. We are trying to quickly, in our state, as other states are, pass legislation that addresses things we hadn't seen even 2 years ago. I'm also, as the state attorney, thinking about how we can responsibly use AI to be more efficient in our courtrooms, in our office, what tools we could use in order to offset workload issues among our workforce. And so my view of this framework, and it's true, you've already heard a couple of people mention the amount of vendors and the pitching that's going on. I am routinely fielding inquiries from vendors who want to pitch a new product to us, and I've heard a spectrum of promises made. And the framework that has been generated is going to be very helpful for offices like mine or any other agent and agency thinking about procuring a tool. It gives them the framework to think about the questions to ask, the terms to include in a contract before they actually sign on the dotted line. There are a lot of things, because so many people, this is a rapidly evolving area and technologies are growing quickly. A lot of us in government, we're not AI scientists, and this provides really checklist of what we should be considering, what we should be talking to a vendor about, what we should be guarding against, to Chirag's point, in order that we are protecting constitutional safeguards and we're not infringing on people's privacy. As a prosecutor's office, I have to be very concerned about confidential information in using these tools and what the back end looks like. And so I think this framework is a great thing. It will be for our office and procurement, and certainly I think for any other governmental entity considering procuring AI.
Great, thank you. And thank you for flagging some of the challenges around the fact that so much of this technology is really vendor driven. And so I do really appreciate the checklists and the different tools that are part of the framework to sort of help even the playing field, if you will, especially to your point, when you have an agency that's not necessarily an expert in AI, having to kind of negotiate some of this. So we'll get into some of those details later in the conversation. Thank you, State Attorney. And Director Derek, your thoughts on AI, how it's evolving in this space, and maybe your hopes and your concerns as well.
Yeah, excuse me. Well, here in Idaho, we have deployed some AI technology. We're exploring deploying other AI technologies, but just to echo what previous presenters have said, there's a ton of direct marketing happening and all manner of promises. And I certainly don't feel like I'm the AI expert. And I think what the framework has really helped me appreciate, we've actually gone through some of the readiness assessments that are part of the framework on tools we've already deployed and said, heck, well, now we've got this readiness assessment. Let's see how we would have done had we done this before. And what we're really learning is that we have some gaps in technical expertise, both internal to our department and external to us, where most of our IT services are managed by a centralized system. But what I think is really promising and exciting about AI is what it could do to improve systems and improve outcomes for people that are justice impacted. So, for example, one of the things we've been piloting recently are some of the reentry spaces where folks who are currently incarcerated can actually engage with chatbots to prepare their own reentry plan, to really work through prioritizing what they might need to work on, first and then second, and baking those into reality based on what resources are available in their specific home areas. So I think there are a lot of potential uses that I can see that are very promising for clients to have a better and more successful reentry. And then for our staff, we're seeing, already some of our early deployments have been more in the prison surveillance area, where we're surveilling things like people who are at risk of self-harm or people who are at risk of harming others, in addition to trying to, maybe introduce drugs into a facility. So I'm seeing some really good opportunities, but also certainly concerned about how things can go awry and how we maybe lack some of the expertise to right now have all the guardrails in place that would actually ensure that the AI we're deploying, doesn't really go sideways. And I know we'll get more into that in the conversation.
Thank you, Director Derek. I just actually have one quick question for Director Derek and also State Attorney Nelson. You talk a little bit about vendors kind of approaching you with various tools. I'm just wondering to what degree, and Chirag, you can feel free to jump in as well, vendors are engaging with you in the development of these tools versus coming to you and saying, I've got something for you and let me sell it to you. Because it does strike me that there'd be a lot of value, right? And working directly with the end users to develop the tools that take into account your operational reality. So I'm just curious what your experience has been with that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in first and say it varies vendor to vendor. And so we have some who it's a very off the shelf. We've built this thing. We'd love to sell it. We think this is a problem that you're probably experiencing, and here you go. And then we have others, and I think our staff much prefer this approach where people say, we understand you have this problem set. How can we help you solve it? And how can we leverage technology in a more useful way? And so we do have at least one vendor that we work with regularly where they're developing alongside small user groups and then continuing to customize based on user feedback.
And our experience is similar. So we've both experiences. We've had plenty of people who have built a product that they are trying to sell us. We've had other companies actually engage with our office to say, what is it that could make you more efficient? And then as a result of that experience, we put together an internal committee here that's made up a cross-section of staff, investigators, and prosecutors who have an interest in AI to come up with a list of those problem sets that they think AI could actually be used to assist with. And so that's ongoing, but our experience has been the same. It's been both, frankly.
Great, thank you for sharing that. This is actually a great transition to kind of our first set of questions around assessing organizational readiness. So a significant, I think, aspect of the CCJ framework is that it really doesn't assume that AI is always going to be the appropriate tool. So it really starts with the decision-making process, not the procurement or implementation. And it offers this set of tools for really assessing the problem that you're trying to solve. Director State Attorney Nelson, you were referring to kind of a committee of folks who are trying to identify those problems, and then the framework walks you through a process of determining whether AI is really the best tool to solve that problem. And then I think it asks a really important question, which is whether the agency, to Director Derek's point, is actually prepared to implement the tool with all of the kind of appropriate guardrails in place. And so I'm wondering what your experience has been around agency preparedness. Kind of what are some of the issues that are coming up, and what is the framework attempting to kind of guard against, or at least prepare agencies for, before they even start to think about procuring and deploying tools? And Chirag, of course, you're welcome, because I know you worked on interagency AI implementation, so I'm sure you've got thoughts about this as well. But maybe I'll start with Director Derek, since she did mention this as an issue for her agency.
Sure. So as I mentioned, we've gone through the readiness assessment that's part of the framework. On some technologies we've already deployed just to see where our gaps would be. And what we realize is we especially sort of fall down in the long-term accountability. So when we're looking to see measure performance of the tools over the long haul and to sort of validate them or really understand their decision making, that's where we've identified gaps in our technical expertise. And I should say the state has also, they've come out with an AI kind of governance, structure and risk matrix of their own. But they rate almost everything we want to do as extremely risky because of the nature of the data that we work with. And so just by virtue of us tackling, criminal justice data that's protected by the feds, they kind of automatically default to AI is probably not a good idea for you. And we've tried to say, well, no, there are still efficiencies to be gained. There are ways to protect this information, but we need to make sure we have the technical expertise either within our organization or within our centralized IT to really monitor these things over the long term. But I would say that the CJIS data has been a particular hurdle for us to clear in our state. I don't know if that's happening for others as well.
I see State Attorney Nelson nodding vigorously, so I'm going to turn it to you to respond.
Yeah, the CJIS information continues to be an obstacle for both my office, other similarly situated offices throughout the state, and police agencies because of the nature of CJIS information. I'm aware that some academic institutions who are dealing with different information, but similarly protected information, they've been very thoughtful about how they create essentially the back office, and so they can protect copyrighted information and when they're working on patents, et cetera. So hopefully we'll get to a place in the criminal justice system that there'll be a fix for that as well. But CJIS 2 for us has been a big obstacle.
So I have to say, I'm a little surprised by your answers, only because I had anticipated you'd talk about some of the issues around data and whether you have the necessary data to actually support some of these AI tools. I know some of the agencies I've worked with, so much is still on paper. And so they're not sort of well positioned necessarily to use these kinds of tools until they've digitized. So it's really interesting and helpful to hear this feedback. Chirag, was there anything you wanted to add to this?
Not on this point, Erica. I'll come in on the next one.
Okay, great. And actually, I think this is one you'll be interested in responding to. So the framework also contemplates that there might be situations where AI applications should be prohibited, and it sounds like there's actually, even in Idaho, some state concerns as well about prohibited uses. there's a very particular tool in the framework, which is called a prohibited use screener, and it helps agencies identify characteristics of applications that should raise red flags. These range from a lack of human review of AI outputs to discriminatory impacts to interference with legal protections. And I'd really be curious to hear what kinds of prohibited uses you're most concerned about. I'm sure the task force really wrestled with these questions. And so, Shrag, maybe we can start with you.
I think this is a significant value add of the framework. It has what's called a prohibited use screener, where there's a series of questions that agencies and communities should ask themselves about the tool that they're considering or the application they're considering. That, depending on the answer, could rule the tool out of bounds. So you mentioned some of them, Erica, but just looking at this screening tool in front of me here, does the system make autonomous decisions about liberty? I mean, that is far out of bounds, and some of the tools that are being hawked these days are liberty affecting tools. They decide, they will have an impact on, whether it's a risk assessment, whether it's classification decisions in incarceration settings. And if those are autonomous without any opportunity for human review, they should be out of bounds. That may be that we're not even at the point where these tools should be used at all in some settings because they're not reliable, because there's bias baked in, and so forth. And the framework rather, also helps get at those kinds of questions. Another one of the questions is, does the system circumvent or undermine established legal and constitutional protections? I refer to this in my opening remarks, but one set of concerns that really is high on my list is around due process. So especially with generative AI, we're talking about a new class of AI where the black box problem is severe. The idea that these are not interpretable tools. We can't actually tell you exactly how the tool kicked out a certain answer based on the inputs. Given that the training data is so broad, the models are so complex, even developers don't understand exactly what's going on inside the tool. And there's a whole arena of research called mechanistic interpretability that's about trying to figure out what these tools are actually doing. If it's that opaque, then it's really hard for, say, a defendant to challenge a classification recommendation or evidence, which is the defendant's right under the Sixth Amendment to cross-examine witnesses, including expert witnesses. If an AI tool is doing the thinking here and is, producing evidence that's used against someone at trial, you can't meaningfully cross-examine them, and that's a serious due process problem. So these are a couple of things that come to mind for me, but the framework tool lists several other questions that, if the answer is yes, you would not pursue the tool at all. It's just prohibited. There are also a set of questions, I should say, that are about substantial risk. It may be that the tool is not, out of bounds completely, but the risk is very high. And Bree was saying, many tools will in fact end up in this category because they are rights impacting. And then the kinds of process you need to go through, the information you need to demand and make sure you understand from the vendor, the testing you need to do. These are very high bars in order to deploy the tool, which I think is a good thing, particularly in this early stage of AI systems being developed.
Great, thank you. State Attorney Nelson, would love to hear kind of your thoughts about the prohibited use screener and whether in the prosecution context you have particular concerns about, for example, tools that may replace the judgment of prosecutors and kind of how you draw those lines. But really just want to hear kind of what your thinking and approach has been in terms of limiting the use of certain tools and what characteristics would really cause you to say, okay, this is not a tool we can use in our office.
So, and I think the prohibited use tool is very helpful. Just like the broader framework is as well, before procuring something and thinking through questions that an agency should grapple with. My biggest thing now is we're discussing AI and AI tools. I know Chirag early on gave an example of facial recognition. It's really, what is the safety net? So something can be valuable like facial recognition. It can work well. It cannot stand on its own, if that makes sense. And so we are having discussions here a lot about so similar to prohibited use, but how to interrogate evidence that is derived from artificial intelligence. What do we need to have in place? And I think I mentioned in preparation for this call, our office is about to publish a policy on allowed uses of AI. This is a little different than, AI, procuring AI tools or deciding if one is prohibited entirely. And we're really trying culturally to train and instill that while AI may have a value in a case and an investigation, it cannot alone give rise to an arrest or a prosecution. It has to be supported by other types of evidence. We've had an issue similar to what was earlier described on a facial recognition case where it was incorrect, it was wrong, and so we're constantly talking about the fails and the hallucinations, the errors that can be, a result of AI, and trying to encourage independent verification and confirmation of whatever it is that we're using, whether it's to use AI to help draft legal briefing, independent verification. And one of the things this framework, I'll close with this, one of the things the framework does in evaluating procurement and evaluating onboarding a certain tool is the consideration of, is this really going to realize an efficiency, or is it going to be negated by the follow-up human requirement of verification? I think that's a really important point made in this framework.
Thank you for that, State Attorney. This actually brings to mind, as part of our Demystifying AI series, Professor Ian Adams has done some interesting research really looking at some of these tools where vendors were making sort of big promises about efficiencies. And once Adams, who's independent, Professor Adams is independent, did his own kind of assessment, found that like some of those claims really were not supported and were not validated. And therefore it was, going to be a huge expenditure of resources and not necessarily with the kinds of efficiencies that were promised. So I think you raise a really important point there. Jesse, I see you wanting to come in.
I just want to say, Ian's also a task force member.
Got it. All right. So shouting out another task force member, but I do really encourage folks to take a look at that research, because I think he really put in concrete terms some of these sort of abstract concepts around efficiency. Chirag, did you have something else you wanted to add? You were kind of looking expectantly. I just wanted to make sure. No, you're good. Okay. No. All right, well then this is a good segue into procurement. So we've talked a little bit about how to assess the problem, what tools are available to think about whether AI is the appropriate tool and whether to rule it out altogether. But a lot of, I think, the value of the framework is around thinking about procurement as an important leverage point for making sure that you're building in all of the safeguards that I think everyone on this panel agrees are necessary for responsible implementation. So the question I really wanted to ask is kind of what advice our panelists have for agency leaders and for the public about how to think about procurement, and what specifically are the kinds of protections that can be built into the contracting process. Director Derek, can I start with you?
Sure. Yes, I have limited thoughts, I think, on this, but I want to set a little bit of context just for folks working in positions similar to mine. When we think about procurement and how fast AI is moving, I think it's really important to recognize how our procurement even happens. And by that, I mean, I am currently building a budget for FY28, which means I have to be about 18 months ahead of any technology I may want to procure right now in thinking about asking for that in my budget. And I think that's pretty typical in states. So when you have technologies that are evolving really quickly and vendors who are popping up and offering great products, that's happening, near daily. I receive an email from somebody trying to sell me a new cool product. And it's really difficult to just evaluate those and also be a year and a half ahead of any new coming technology. So I often find ourselves in a bit of a state where we feel like we're behind. We get really excited about a technology. We work to move forward on procurement. And by the time we actually have the funding in our budget to obtain the technology, it's almost obsolete and something new has replaced that. So that's just the reality of working kind of in state government. For me, I think, this almost gets to the last question you asked the other panelist is, the context is a little different in corrections. And so I think a lot of the work that as a task force, we work through some conversations on when you're talking about liberty decisions or surveillance decisions, there is a different context inside a correctional facility. There's some expectation of surveillance in that environment. There are somewhat diminished freedoms in that environment, but we're still very mindful of them. And I think that those are the pieces that I'm most interested in having in kind of future AI procurement efforts, to be really clear about what is the sort of auditability of the tool that's being used. How can we ensure that it's being applied fairly and we're not creating biases in our systems, whether that's classifying people or preparing for release. And then what sort of ownership do we have over the data? Like who does all the data belong to? How much of it is owned, should be owned by clients? How much should be owned by us? How much is owned by some external vendor? Those are all the pieces that we're thinking about and that the framework, helps us think through as we go into future procurement.
Great, thank you. Chirag, do you have thoughts on the procurement piece and sort of necessary terms that folks and agencies should be thinking about integrating into their contracting process?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts. So one, I would note that vendors often will report metrics that obscure the information you really want to know. I mean, they'll tout the high numbers, but then not get granular. So it's incumbent on the agencies and the communities to really push for the information they need. For example, a facial recognition system might advertise, nearly perfect accuracy, 99% accuracy based on mugshots, data sets of mugshots, for example, but it doesn't tell you how they'll perform on body cam footage or in low light conditions. So you'll want to ask about that as well, where you're going to actually get an image that you're then going to be comparing or using the system to analyze to decide whether you should in the first place pursue it. What are the real world error rates? Are they disaggregated by race, gender, and other demographics? These are requirements that I would have, at least ask. You should have that information before you make a decision. And then in terms of your question about terms in the contract, yeah, I mean, this is a place for the agency to empower itself and the community. So thinking about enforceable performance standards, independent validation. Has this been validated? By whom? Were they in fact independent? Where did the funding come from for their testing? Data rights, I think, is a great one that Director Derek mentioned, that the agency will retain this data, and also that perhaps it cannot be trained on. The model can't be trained on this data. You're worried about leakage or, lack of privacy protections. And then also the framework discusses termination clauses for rights violations. If you step back and think about it, we shouldn't be paying for technology that doesn't work and that violates people's rights. This is taxpayer money. This is coming from the community. And so we should be able to cut off these contracts. And in fact, I think that there should be provisions in there that require the companies to pay the community back where there are rights violations.
Thank you. I mean, one of the strategies that stood out to me in the framework was around requiring, particularly for higher risk tools, the ability for agencies to actually pilot a tool before they, formally enter into a long-term contract. And if I'm remembering correctly, I think it was part of the way that Professor Adams was able to do his research was that I think there was a sort of pilot happening in one of the jurisdictions, and sort of he came in to do that independent validation before there was a real commitment to actually purchasing a tool. So thank you for raising all of those. We are running a little bit close to time, and I do want to make sure that we get a couple questions in here, and I see a few. This first one, I think I may direct to Jesse, and Jesse, you're well within your rights to say, I don't know. This is outside of our scope, but I'll ask it of you and see if there's something that you wanted to share about this. The question is, it's been said that the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act is a global blueprint for establishing AI standards. Um, does the guide overlap with any of the tenets of the EU AI Act? Was that a consideration at all for you? Did you look to other countries, for potential models or approaches? Did the task force?
Yeah, thanks for this question. Yeah, the short answer is yes. We did look at thought about a bunch of different frameworks for AI governance, including the EU AI Act, and sort of are thinking about sort of graduated responsibilities, depending on risk levels. There was parts that were sort of inspired by that in a rather direct way, and also there is a sort of prohibited section of that entered into our thinking as well. So short answer is yes. It is a kind of global search for the optimal governance structure, and I think as much as I'm quite convinced that there are sort of specificities about criminal justice policy and practice that require that make a task force like ours make sense and make this kind of conversation especially useful. We shouldn't be in a silo, and having ways to learn from other efforts is really important.
Thank you. Forgive me for underestimating you.
Yeah.
I was skeptical, but it turns out this task force had it all covered. So thank you for that, Jesse. So this next question asks, when considering AI tools for reentry and housing stabilization outcomes, does your agency prioritize systems that predict individual risk and need at intake, or systems that generate individualized coordination plans and accountability workflows in real time as circumstances change? So this, I think, is directed to Director Derek. And I think if I had to simplify it, I think the question is, are you just taking into account when someone walks into your custody, what their risks and needs are versus how they may have evolved through programming and other interventions during their time of incarceration as you kind of plan for reentry, I think is the question.
Yeah, and I think the answer is really both. We do assessments, risk and need assessments on every individual who walks through the doors, and those get updated periodically during someone's stay. And also when they're engaging in some of the reentry planning, it's much more about, what's currently in front of them and what are the challenges that they see as most important. And so hopefully our staff are working to think about both existing kind of criminogenic risk and needs, and also what feels most present for them and where they maybe want to start. But I think some of the work with staff and even with the chatbots is helping people understand that the priorities may not be what they naturally go to. So just a really short example, if somebody, if it's a mom who's incarcerated, has several children, she doesn't have a home plan, but she hopes to reunite with her 3 or 4 children. Well, maybe the prioritization suggests you need to get stable housing before you reunite. Otherwise, you might be bringing your 3 or 4 children into homelessness with you. And so it's really a dialogue about not only what the risk and needs tools tell us, but what's going on for the individual person.
Got it. So there's still sort of a certain amount of human oversight to try to engage with what the tools are advising.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that. I think we have time for one more question. The question is, will there be standardized language for AI-related procurements for procurement offices? So I think this is a question, maybe Jesse, to ask you. Yeah.
Happy to jump in, and if anybody else has things to add. So maybe less short answer on this one is that we won't be producing that currently, given our workflow. But I think I'm hopeful that that I think is a really good idea, and a body sort of the Justice Consortium others like excited for people to take this as a first step and go towards more. One resource I would point people to is the GovAI Coalition, which is a group based out of the city of San Jose. It's based in the city government, has a lot of templates that they've collated and are really helpful and interesting. And I think there are some responsive things in there.
Great, thank you, Jesse. So we have just about 3 minutes left. I have many more questions, but there's just one actually that I think it's really important that we get to before we close out, which is the question around community engagement. So the framework does contemplate, particularly when a tool's been identified as high risk, that there be some level of engagement with community and that there be some oversight mechanisms so that the broader community that agencies are serving understand how these tools are operating and have an opportunity to weigh in. And community engagement is something that is very easy to talk about and very difficult to do. And I would really love to hear from our panelists about either what your experience has been in engaging with the communities you serve around AI tools, or whether you know of good examples of how that's been done. So that folks who are with us on this call can be thinking about what a good model is for community engagement around AI. Chirag, I'll call on you first.
Yeah, I think this is an area of serious need. For too long, high stakes technologies of all kinds, even before you get to AI, have been adopted as closed decisions of criminal justice agencies. Should we buy this technology? Should we implement it? And perhaps you consult with some experts that but there's not a kind of formal process in most places to engage the community on it. There's not meaningful public engagement. And I like this question because it goes back to this idea of democratic accountability, especially when we're talking about hugely powerful rights and safety impacting technologies. Communities have to have a voice, I think, before technology is deployed on them, especially given the cost that is involved. And the framework actually helps a little bit with this. There's early on in the system, in the process rather, there's a part where you put together your assessment team. Who are the team of people who's going to be considering the questions that the framework lays out? And it requires the inclusion of community representatives as part of this multidisciplinary assessment team in phase 2, if you go look at the document of the framework. And also there's this idea of establishing a formal community advisory committee that actually has authority under what we call level 2 safeguards, that are higher level safeguards where the tools pose substantial risk. There are lots of areas of the criminal justice system where we've experimented with this. Police oversight boards is, one that comes to mind. But we may well need to create something that's, not just having a town hall where community members can develop expertise and they can kind of be repeat players with agencies in grappling with these questions.
Great, thank you. So this sounds like future directions for this work in terms of thinking about what those mechanisms for community engagement should be. All right, well, we are at time, but I want to make sure that everyone has a chance for any final thoughts. Please feel free to share anything that we haven't been able to get to, or otherwise maybe a piece of advice for an agency leader who's thinking about making these kinds of decisions around the adoption of AI. So final thoughts can either be sort of a piece of advice or just any final reflections on this conversation. And I will start with State Attorney Nelson.
Read the framework and use it.
Good advice. Thank you for keeping it brief. Director Derek.
I second that. I feel like it's been really helpful to me to work through some of the assessment pieces and to really, be more thoughtful about what we were planning to implement and what we hope to implement in the future. So hopefully others find it as useful.
Wonderful. Thank you. Chirag, is there anything else you want to add?
I agree. I'll just say we'll also take any feedback or further questions. The task force work is continuing. I love the question about the procurement language. If there are resources that would be useful, research we can do, we welcome your thoughts on that.
Wonderful. And Jesse, I think it's appropriate that we end with you.
Thank you. Yeah, I was basically going to say just continue to follow along. We're continuing to do work, and we want it to be useful. So eager for thoughts and conversation. And maybe last thing to close is like just better is better. You don't have to figure out everything to figure out something. Like I think it can get very intimidating, but taking it a piece at a time is really worthwhile.
Great. Do not make the perfect the enemy of the good. Well, thank you very much to Jesse, to the Council on Criminal Justice and the task force for just the great piece of work that you did with the framework and also just across the sort of AI and justice space. Thank you to State Attorney Nelson. Thank you, Director Derek, and thank you, Chirag, for joining us. It's been a fascinating conversation. There is never enough time, and I am sure we will find new ways to work together and hopefully deliver more programming on AI and justice for our audience. So thank you all and have a good afternoon.
Thank you.